For 60 minutes as the designee of the minority leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, tonight I rise here to talk about the rule of law and the fact that there are those in our society who seem to want to circumvent the rule of law and think because of their position in either in Congress or in the government that the law shouldn't pertain to them the same as it pertains to other Americans, that they should be treated specially. And even though our president stated that he didn't think that that's what the American people, that he was going to fight to make sure there were no special treatment for people other than everybody get treated equally, he didn't, we still got this issue going on. And I've been talking about this, and I've been talking about Chairman Rangel and his issues with the tax folks and about how the rule of law didn't seem to apply to him. And tonight I'm going to talk about Secretary Geithner, Secretary of Treasury. But before I start on talking about this, I was thinking as I was sitting here listening to people talk, and everybody was very informative, that there may be people who really don't understand what I say when I talk about the rule of law. The rule of law is a very basic concept. It is a prevailing concept that holds our republic together here in the United States. But in truth of fact, the whole world seeks a system where the rule of law prevails, because it is that system which gives recourse to the ordinary person. So let me just point out some of the things that we're talking about here tonight that the rule of law is part of. When I say recourse, the average American citizen, if someone is breaking into their house, if they hear a burglar prying open the back door of their home, they call 911 and ask them to send out a police officer or a sheriff's deputy or someone to protect their home. And they know that we have procedures whereby that officer has the authority to come in and make an arrest of that person, to protect the homestead of the person that's being violated. They know that there's someone they can call who will help, and that there are rules that the society they live in have established so that they get treated fairly in being protected by the law, and the person who is accused of breaking the law is also treated fairly because we have rules that we have all agreed upon, or the rules that our society will follow. That's the rule of law. When we talk about Afghanistan, which is an issue that probably, as I am speaking, the president is speaking on some other channel about this. The issue when you're talking about counterinsurgency, cut down to its finest point, is establishing the rule of law in a war zone, if you will. We did it in Iraq, and basically we did it with a simple principle which we've used in New York City to lower crime rate. We used it in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia to lower the crime rate. Big cities have used it from time to time everywhere, and that is community policing. That is the idea that there is somebody in your neighborhood you can turn to and say, help me, I need your help. And really, counterinsurgency is using the military to train up the local folks in their police force and in their army so that their citizens know that they can be protected by their police force and their army and their court system and their government from those who would do them harm. So they don't have to look to the strongest guy in the neighborhood, which may be the Taliban, to protect their interests. They can look to the government and the society that's been established by that government. And counterinsurgency is basically putting American forces and indigenous forces in place in neighborhoods all over Afghanistan so that the Afghan citizens realize there's someone there permanently to make sure that they are treated right and treated fairly. And so it's the beginning of the establishment of the rule of law. We in the United States have been blessed for our entire history with a rule of law. And in fact, we don't salute a king. We don't salute a dictator. We don't salute an individual that sovereignty comes from that individual. We salute a document. When those of us who are fortunate enough to be elected to Congress and are able to serve our constituents back home here in Congress, when we have the opportunity to be in Congress, we stand up and we make an oath. And that oath is to the Constitution of the United States, that we will preserve, protect, and defend that Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Because the Constitution is that beginning set of rules of law that we established this republic under. So we are a very blessed nation. We started with the rules of law. Today, in many nations around this country, this world, there are still folks who don't have some rules that they can feel comfortable will be there to protect their society. And a lot of what happens when you create a counterinsurgency force like we're doing in Afghanistan, we're establishing that security for those people who live in that country. So that's a little off subject, but it kind of gets you the idea of how important it is that a people, whoever the people are, wherever they exist on this earth, have some set of rules they can feel they will be treated just like their neighbor next door or the guy clear across the country. They're going to be treated fairly. They're going to be treated, and they're going to have a source that they can get recourse for something that happens to them. It's a very simple concept, but it is the foundation concept of a civil society, of a society that functions properly. And one of the things that offends the rule of law, and what has offended Americans at every stage of our history, is when there are those who think the law doesn't apply to me. It applies to you, but it doesn't apply to me. I'm more important than you. I am a big shot, or I am a powerful person, or I am a rich person. So the law doesn't apply to me. It applies to you. And there's always going to be those misdirected people in any society that feel that way. But it's our duty, when we see people who are taking that position, or where a group of people is taking that position on behalf of an individual, that they're above the law. They're above being treated the same as you might be treated, or that I might be treated. They're special. They should have special treatment. Let me show you what the president said about that. President Barack Obama on February 3rd, 2009 said, "I campaign on changing Washington and bottom-up politics. I don't want to send a message to the American people that there are two sets of standards, one for powerful people and one for ordinary folks who are working every day and paying their taxes." That's what the President of the United States said about the rule of law as it pertains to what he wanted in his presidency. And there's lots of laws in the United States that pertain to all of us. Most of us don't feel pressure of most laws because the vast majority of American citizens are very law-abiding. They do what they're supposed to do. They may speed every once in a while, but that's the law they break, and occasionally they get caught, and they expect to be treated like everybody else. And they may do some little minor things that they shouldn't do, but the truth is we are very law-abiding people, the American people. But there's one area that we are all affected by every day, and I would even argue that many of us in this country fear, and that is the area of the internal revenue and our taxes. Because quite frankly, our tax code would just about fill this giant room we're in right here, and we all kind of wonder if anybody could possibly know everything that's in the tax code, and yet we all are supposed to fill out a form and pay our taxes every year. And so I think everybody kind of down deep, and that's why they go to CPAs and others to help them with their taxes, is because they are kind of worried that they might not get it right, and they might be punished for not getting it right. And some of them even worry they might go to jail for not getting it right. And so Americans very diligently spend large amounts of their income every year to make sure they get their taxes right. And that goes for the ordinary guy and to the PhD at the major university, the smartest guy in town. They all have to deal with the IRS and deal with making sure they do things right. Well, everybody makes mistakes, and sometimes somebody is going to make a mistake. Some people make those mistakes unintentionally, and some people intentionally. It's not a mistake. They intentionally do something wrong. The tax code has punishments to fit those individuals. But what I want to talk about tonight is the fact that the man who is the Secretary of Treasury of the United States, he's the man who is in charge of our money and in charge of our tax system. The IRS reports to Secretary Geithner. Secretary Geithner did not pay some taxes that he was supposed to pay. So let me talk to you a little bit about that. First, let me explain to you what happened with Mr. Geithner. Mr. Geithner has a master's in international economics from Johns Hopkins University. He's the director of policy development and review for the International Monetary Fund, a senior fellow on the Council of Foreign Relations. He's the U.S. Treasury Secretary, the head of the Internal Revenue Service. The specific tax violation that he had was he failed to pay Social Security and Medicare taxes on the IMF earnings for tax years 2001, 2002, 2003, and 2004. The total liability that he owed was approximately $43,200. Now, so that you understand what this is, the International Monetary Fund was paying him separately apart from other things he was doing, and he has to be treated like he is self-employed. And so a self-employed person has to pay not only his share of payroll taxes, but he has to pay the employer's share of payroll taxes too, because you're self-employed. So self-employed people pay the employer's share of payroll taxes, which the payroll taxes is basically Social Security and Medicare, and they pay their own share. And each of you, if you look at your check, you'll see your payroll taxes and how much you pay every month to the government. Well, when you're paid by the International Monetary Fund, they give you a check every month that tells, or every year, I don't know which it is, that tells you how much you make. They tell you how much income taxes they paid on your behalf, and they tell you on that document you are responsible for paying your payroll taxes. So I mean, it's not like somebody didn't tell you. You read it when you get your check, when you get your statement about your income. You read it and it tells you you have to pay this. We didn't take this out. You got to pay it. And quite frankly, Mr. Geithner signed off on that document every year that told him that. And that part of the money he was being paid was for the purpose of paying these things. He has admitted that he had made a shortfall in doing this. And he said it was It was a mistake. He made a mistake. He had a signed statement. He signed a statement acknowledging he owed the tax. He paid the taxes. His position with the IMF and his education specifically dealt with the issues of Social Security and Medicare system integration into the world economy. He paid his taxes, but he didn't pay any. I think he paid his interest on the taxes, but he didn't pay any penalties on the taxes. But if you and I had done the same thing that Mr. Geithner had done, he would have paid we would have paid penalties. The United States 14th Amendment is the Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution. It states, and among other things, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, or deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Equal protection of the laws. When we're talking about property, money is property, just like land is property. Okay? Now, the IRS has lately decided to establish certain back tax penalties that you have to pay for failing to pay your taxes. And in fact, they've got a program going on right now where they're saying to people who have made money offshore, if you'll come in and give yourself up because you earned some money offshore that you should have paid taxes on, and pay those taxes, we'll make you a deal and we'll set out in black and white what your interest and penalties are going to be. And this is about penalties. Offshore depositors amnesty offer, what they promised them to give them, if you'll turn yourself in, we will only give you a 20% of the amount will be for penalties. Offshore depositors without amnesty would pay 50% penalty. The standard taxpayer's negligent disregard, that means he was negligent and disregarded what he should owe, is 20%. A standard taxpayer that defrauds the government, the penalties are 75%. So that's the rules that are supposed to apply to every American and every American entity, including corporations, partnerships, and so forth. But Secretary Tim Geithner paid zero on $43,200 in taxes that he didn't pay. Chairman Rangel paid zero. It seems that some taxpayers appear to be more equal than other taxpayers. And that's what President Obama told us this administration is all about. No two set of standards, one for powerful people and one for ordinary folks. And that's what we're talking about in the rule of law. And that's why I come down here and talk about the rule of law, because quite frankly, it's supposed to pertain to every one of us. Every one of us is supposed to be treated equally. And quite frankly, there may be individual citizens that can negotiate this out. But we've asked the question, and we don't have the answers as to why they haven't paid this. I wrote letters to Chairman Rangel asking him to pay the penalties and interest. Got no reply. A good explanation would have probably prevented all this. I don't know. The same thing for Mr. Geithner. He's been asked in committee about this, and he says they didn't assess any penalties. That's kind of like saying the boss didn't punish himself for his malfeasance. I'm sorry. That's like the judge shouldn't punish himself if he did something wrong. And that's not the way we operate in this country. People in authority should not be able to give themselves a break because they have authority over the agency that regulates and should regulate their behavior when they violated the rules. That's not what the rule of law is all about. That's not what we're trying to teach people in Iraq and Afghanistan with our military forces risking their lives to establish for them the safety and the assurance that the individual citizen in those countries will be treated fairly and will have somebody they can turn to make sure they'll be treated fairly. This body, this Congress of the United States, should be about making sure that everybody is treated fairly. We should be about maintaining the oath that we took, and that oath said, we will preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. And the oath to take in Texas is not only for the Constitution of the United States, it's also for the state of Texas and the laws pertaining thereto. And that's our job. And when we see things like this, we should be concerned about it. We should be upset about it. We have introduced, are going to introduce a bill in the Congress that we're going to call the Geithner Penalty Waiver Act. And this bill is to provide the same penalty rate for taxpayers who voluntarily disclose unreported income from offshore accounts as was afforded Timothy Geithner with respect to his failure to pay self-employment taxes with respect to his compensation from the monetary fund. The law will be the law pertaining to Section 1401 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986. The key word, same penalty. This formally recognizes the legal precedent already established by the IRS treatment of U.S. Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner. So what I'm saying in this bill that we're going to offer is basically to all these tax cheats that they seem to be talking about in the IRS right now that are offshore, if they come in and voluntarily do what they said they should do, let's treat them like we treated the chief tax man of the United States, the top tax guy. Let's just treat them like him. That's only fair. If he doesn't have to pay the penalties and interest, if he gets off from those penalties, I don't think any other people should have to pay penalties. Because the truth is, we want to do what the president said. We don't want there to be one set of laws for important people in Washington and another set of laws for the rest of the people in America and those who earn income that are Americans. It's only fair. It's like the wrangle rule. If you haven't paid your taxes, you can write wrangle rule on your tax form and won't have to pay any penalty and interest until Mr. Wrangle does anyway. This is the same concept. It's the same indicator that there are those, and they are in positions of very high power related to our tax structure, that are being treated differently from the ordinary American. The ordinary Texan that works in the oil fields or works in the computer industry, and he fails to pay taxes or he's late on his taxes, he gets penalties and interest. And he pays them, just like every other taxpayer in the country. When the IRS says you owe penalty and interest, you might question them. When they show you owe them, show you the law that pertains to you, we pay them. Even if we have to work out a payment schedule, but we pay them. We don't get, oh, well, I forgot who you were. Oh, I'm sorry. You don't have to pay penalties because I didn't realize you were the Secretary of Treasury. I didn't realize you were the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. So just don't worry about it. We don't get treated that way. I don't get treated that way. And I would argue that no member of this House gets treated that way with certain exceptions. And those exceptions are not right. And this political correctness we got going in this country, there are things that are right and there are things that are wrong. And you've got to stand up and say, that's not right. That's where we're supposed to be. That's what we're supposed to do here. That's why we're here. And I'm sure somewhere in this country today, as I'm speaking, there's some family that is almost sweating blood in their relationship with the Internal Revenue Service, trying to figure out how they're going to meet the obligations. And in some instances, people have messed up so bad and neglected paying their taxes that the penalties and interest are as much or more than the taxes that are owed. And sometimes this can be so onerous on a family, it can literally destroy that family, because everything they have just about is subject to a tax lien, to be seized by the government, to be sold, to force the payment of these things. This is serious stuff that happens to American citizens when they don't pay their taxes. And they all know it. Everybody here knows that. And everybody that might be watching us, they understand that failing to pay your taxes is serious business. And it can be horrible for you and your family. I don't want anything horrible to happen to Mr. Geithner, and I don't want anything horrible to happen to Mr. Rangel. But I want them to be treated like everybody else there in the United States that's out there today. I want them to have to meet their obligations to our country just like every American citizen has to meet their obligations. And I promise you that there's probably thousands of Americans right out there today that are worrying how they're going to keep their family under the roof with the tax burden that's fallen upon, and the penalties and interest that have fallen upon them as a result of their failure to pay taxes. It's just not fair. It's just not fair. And more importantly, if you waive the rule for somebody because they're important, they have a title, they are special because you elected them, or because somebody you elected appointed them to a job, this law affects every American in the country, the tax law. But so do all the other criminal laws, the other criminal laws and the other rules in this society. And are you going to let them get away with waiving those other rules too? We've talked some about this. We've had issues right here in this Congress about the President of the United States and the White House interfering in the rule of contract. That's making sure that certain laws don't count to certain people. And that's not right. When we had the takeover of the automobile industry, when they said the unions get their deal, but the bondholders don't get their deal, they circumvented the law. Special privileges were given to special groups. And that's wrong. We can't let this continue in this country. We can't continue to let the powerful dictate outside the law. Because where does it stop? Where does it stop? I see that my friend Mr. Westmoreland is here to join me, and I'm proud to have him here. So I'll yield to him some comments he might have on this subject.
Well, I just want to thank the gentleman for yielding and for having this special hour. And I did want to comment that, you know, we're also supposed to be treated equally in this country, and it doesn't matter if you're a mayor, city councilman, state representative, state senator, whatever you're elected to or appointed to, you should be treated the same as every citizen in this country. And you know, I guess it was back in February of 2009 that President Obama made a statement, and I don't know if the gentleman from Texas has talked about this yet or not, but I think this is what the American people were looking for when they elected President Obama, because of what he had said on the campaign trail and what I believe people believe to be the truth. I think he was sincere in saying that there would be hope and change. And I think some of the change that people were counting on was to change as politics as usual, or how they had perceived politics in Washington. Because as the gentleman from Texas knows, in politics, it doesn't matter what the truth is, it's what the perception is. And right now, as I travel around the country, and I'm sure as the gentleman travels through his state, across the country, and even into other lands, we hear that, you know, what's wrong with Washington? Why is it that, you know, you've got all these different people of being accused of these different things of getting special treatment? And the president said, and I'll quote, "I campaign on changing Washington in bottom-up politics. I don't want to send a message to the American people that there are two sets of standards, one for the powerful people and one for ordinary folks who are working every day and paying their taxes." Now, that was a quote from President Obama on February the 3rd, 2009. And I'm sure, as the gentleman mentioned, I think in his a previous slide, about the IRS employees. Now, these are the employees that are under Secretary Geithner. And what it says is willful failure to file any return of tax required under the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 on or before the date prescribed therefore, including any extensions, unless such failure is due to reasonable cause and not willful neglect. And we know from at least the testimony that we've heard that this was willful neglect, that he had actually been reimbursed this money by the company that he was working for. And so I think it was neglect, and I think this needs to be looked at, and I'm not sure you know, what committee or jurisdiction or whatever that this would come through. Maybe the gentleman from Texas knows, but this should be something that we demand of somebody that holds an office like Secretary of the Treasury. Because, you know, we have people, I have filed for extensions, as I'm sure many people have filed for extensions, and I have never yet had the same treatment or had any constituents that's had the same treatment as the Secretary of the Treasury, and while his dealings have been with the Internal Revenue. And I'll yield back to the gentleman.
Reclaiming my time for a moment, point this out: the IRS Restructuring and Reform Act of 1998, Section 1203, termination of employment for misconduct. IRS employees can and are terminated for just what my friend from Georgia just read to you: willful failure to file a return or willful neglect. So Mr. Geithner is arguably the head of the IRS. All those beneath him, from the director of the IRS all the way down to the guy who answers the phone and helps you work on your tax return, if any of those employees do what Secretary Geithner does, by law, it says they can and are terminated for this action. Should the Secretary of Treasury have to comply with the same law as the regular IRS workers? Some employees appear to be more equal than others. That is, if you're the boss, you don't have to comply. And this mandatory firing doesn't pertain to you. Recently, Kevin Brady of Texas called upon Secretary of Treasury to resign. And on this issue, I think if there was someone besides the president, I guess the president is above the Secretary of Treasury, but based on following the same rules that his employees follow, he would be terminated under the law of the IRS Restructuring and Reform Act of 1998. So you want to know where that rule of law is? There's the rule. And there's what happens. Terminated. Except for Mr. Geithner. I yield back to my friend.
Well, you know, in the gentleman from Texas, some people that if anybody was watching us tonight, they might think that this is some type of partisan thing that we have. It's not. In fact, it goes well beyond that. If the posting of November the 17th, 2009, the Huffington Post, which is no conservative posting, had a comment. And it said, but for his personal tax problems, Tim Geithner would have been a consensus choice of Wall Street for Treasury Secretary last fall. Yet, from the outset, Mr. Geithner's appointment compromised the Obama administration to be's credibility on ethics. the Treasury Secretary has become a continuing liability for this president. So even the most liberal of the blogs and the web pages understand that this goes against the credibility of what this administration has said about it was going to change Washington. And as the gentleman knows, it's not just this appointment, it was other appointments to where he had to issue waivers of what some of his administration rules or promises were to allow other lobbyists or people to be not only in his cabinet but appointments of his. So I think that it's not just the conservative world or it have anything to do with partisan politics. I think that everybody, and it seems like especially those that voted for him, are calling Mr. Geithner's credibility into account with the administration. So I think the ultimate bearer of responsibility on this is the president and the administration, and I'd like to know if he's getting any advice as to why this secretary is getting special treatment. And I just don't think that that's what the American people felt like we were going to get after this last election. And I'll yield back to my friend.
And you know, I'm an old history buff. I believe that you learn from history. And in recent history, in the Clinton administration and in the George W. Bush administration, there were prospective cabinet members who it was discovered had a domestic working for them that was possibly without papers to be in the United States, and it caused them not to get confirmed for that position because why? They were violating the laws as pertain to illegal aliens, the rule of law. And those people, the labor secretary under the Bush administration, had a domestic that was from another country that didn't have appropriate papers and withdrew the name because the rule of law wasn't being followed in her household. Inadvertently, just like, I'm not saying he did this to be mean, vindictive, or cheat the American public. That's kind of between him and the IRS. But I'm saying it happened, and he admits it happened. And yet, for some reason, the rule of law is not an interference for him being Secretary of Treasury. And yet, in 2 previous administrations, violating a rule of law has prevented people from becoming a cabinet member. I think we should be concerned as we look at the Obama administration, which promised such promise. They gave us such glowing promises about nobody was going to be treated differently for their position. To start off and now have a whole year of people in positions where they violated the rule of law, and they don't think it applies to them. Now, I'm sure there's somebody sitting out there saying, oh, come on, this isn't a big deal. My question is, where do you draw the line? You, back out there at home, and most of the members of Congress and their wives and children here in Washington, we know how scary the IRS can be if they're calling you and sending you letters and talking about tax liability and talking about tax liens and things like that, how scary they can be. And maybe that law doesn't scare everybody, but it sure scares me and a whole lot of people I know. Now, there's other laws that are even more serious. And you would say, well, they could never be waived. They could never not pertain. How do you know? And once you decide that there are people that are above the law in a country, how far above the law do they have to go? Can they commit embezzlement? Maybe. You know, if they're smart, swindle somebody a little bit. I don't know. How about murder? Are you going to rule the law? Are you going to waive the law as to murder? Just pick a bad one. That's a pretty bad one. And say, does this pertain to everybody in the country equally? It certainly should. But if you're willing to excuse one law at whatever level, then where do you stop excusing? Does somebody get so powerful and so important in this country, when you set this kind of precedent that somebody gets so powerful and important that we waive those other laws on their behalf? They can break our established laws, and we will waive it because they're so important to our country. We've got to have them, no matter what. I don't think so. I really don't think so. I really think that's the kind of precedent that you see started in one of the most law and order places on earth, Germany, in the 1920s. And look what happened when they excused one law, and then another, and then another, and then another. And then if you were a certain party member, it didn't pertain to you. And then if you were a certain official, it didn't pertain to you. And then they made the laws. That's not America. We have to preserve the rule of law. I think my friend understands this seems to be going way off, but it's not way off. Once you start saying it's okay to do something that's breaking the law, then where do you stop? Where do you draw the line at the next thing? Is not paying your taxes and not having the law apply to you here, does that mean that the next step is you might, take stimulus money and stick it in your pocket, or you might do something else and we'll excuse that because they're really important and they were trying to do a good thing for the country, and you keep going and going and going, and what do you have? Lawless society. Yield back to my friend from Georgia for a comment.
And thank my friend for yielding. And let me just say this, that there were several appointees that the president made after his election that was discovered that they had tax problems. One former senator that was looked at for the Health and Human Services Secretary excused himself because he had tax problems. There were other people that had been appointed that had tax problems that excused themselves. And we need to point out, I think, to my friend from Texas that Mr. Geithner's problems were pointed out prior to his approval or confirmation by the Senate.
That's right.
And so, this brings into another whole new question. I mean, is it something that we're going to accept? I mean, is this something that's supposed to be accepted? I just don't think so. I think, of our brother, and I think it was a mistake on their part when they knew exactly what had gone on, and they still went ahead with the confirmation process, whereas they should have just continued to ask questions and got more information on this. But I think it talks about character when the people that were under nomination, I mean, and let's face it, it's quite an honor to be nominated to serve in the cabinet of any president in this country. What an honor. But with that comes some personal responsibility. And I think some of these nominees realized that what they were going to be doing was going to be a reflection on the administration, and not just the administration, but the rule of law, as you talked about, and how it affects and applies to everybody. And so it's with that I think the gentleman from Texas has done a great job, and I've signed, I think, both of the piece of the legislation, the Wrangle Rule, and the Geithner Penalty Waiver Act. I think that's something that we can do to show the American people that we want to see some equal treatment. But I just wanted to bring into account this personal responsibility that people have to recognize that if they have done something wrong or gotten treatment that was unfair, they just recluse themselves from the nomination.
And let me be clear on this from just what I previously said. By doing the Wrangle Rule, and how much time do we have?
15 minutes.
Okay, you got time. Now, by doing this, which basically says everybody else gets treated the same, it's to give you that equal protection under the law that we promise in our Constitution. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do. I'm saying the right thing to do is for Mr. Geithner to pay the penalties that everybody else pays. I'm saying the right thing to do is for Mr. Wrangle to pay the interest and penalties that everybody else pays. But if that's the precedent being established by this administration at this time, then everybody ought to be treated equally. It's only fair. I will tell you, it's probably a bad precedent. And I would argue that. And I'll tell you, I don't expect this to pass. But I do expect us to raise the issue. And that's a way to raise the issue. To say to the American people, they're just what the president said, there's no two sets of standards. One for the powerful and one for the ordinary guy who pays his taxes. It's exactly what this is all about. This is just as simple as those words from our President of the United States. There's no two sets of standards. And if we are going to reinforce and continue to reinforce and not call to account the Secretary of Treasury and the Chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, if we're going to continue to do that, that at some point in time, these two bills that I've offered and that my friend has joined me in, that should become the law of the United States. Because now we have decided that this particular offense is no longer a violation of the rule of law. Mm-hmm. So from now on, we pay our taxes when we get around to it, and there's no punishment attached to it. Maybe that is fair. Maybe we'd all be happy with that. Probably would. But I'm not advocating that as good policy. I'm advocating good policy as everybody be treated equally. That's what I'm advocating. Back to my friend.
Isn't it ironic that the chairman writes the tax laws and the secretary, who is head of the Treasury, that is really the boss of the IRS, are the two with the tax problems? Mr. Rangel, being chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, I felt it was interesting when he admitted that he didn't realize what the law was, or I can't remember his exact quote, but basically he didn't realize that he was breaking the law. But from the constituents that have called me, and I don't know about the gentleman what your calls have been like, they've told me that the Internal Revenue Service tells them that ignorance is no excuse.
That's right.
That ignorance is no excuse. That, it doesn't matter if you know that was a tax law or not. If you don't pay and if you don't file correctly, you're going to pay penalty and interest. Now, the chairman also made the comment that he got his accountant to figure up what he felt like he owed and send the Internal Revenue a check for that. Now, here again, I've had my constituents tell me that they have never had the IRS tell them, well, look, you just figure out what you think you owe us and send us a check, and we're all square. They typically send a bill and tell you what you owe them, plus what the penalty is, plus what the interest is. Now, it's up to the taxpayer to prove that they don't owe that. It's not the responsibility of the Internal Revenue to show you why you do owe that tax or why you do owe that penalty or that interest. It's up to the taxpayer. It's the taxpayer's responsibility to tell them why you don't. And so, talking about the double standards, when you find yourself in that situation and you say, well, I'll get my accountant to figure out what I think that I owe you and I'll send you a check and we'll all be square, that doesn't square with the typical taxpayer in how they're treated by the Internal Revenue Service. So we've got the gentleman that actually writes the laws and the rules that govern the IRS and what our tax code is, that said, I don't understand it. But according to IRS and to every other citizen, ignorance is no excuse.
Reclaiming my time for a moment, that's exactly right, and I agree with my friend. At the bottom it says, this is something that Mr. Geithner signed when he got his money from his statements and all this stuff from the International Monetary Fund. In accordance with General Administrative Order Number 5, revision so-and-so and so-and-so, I wish to apply for tax allowance from the U.S. federal state income taxes and differences between self-employed and employed obligations of the United States Social Security, and I will pay on my fund income. I authorize the fund or any of the staff members designated by it for the purpose of ascertaining from the appropriate tax authorities whether tax returns were received. And he certifies that he will pay those taxes.
Is that false swearing?
Well, that is false swearing. And in Texas,
isn't that against the law?
In Texas, that's against the law.
To the gentleman from Texas is not in Texas. I think it is in Georgia.
Yeah.
Of the committee that I think in Georgia, false swearing
We're talking
is,
on top of each
yeah.
other. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I learned a long time from court reporters. Talking on top of each other is a cardinal sin for court reporters. And I've worked with them for now going on 30 years of my life. So let's don't talk over each other.
Yes,
But
sir.
seriously, that's exactly right. There is another crime in false swearing on a federal form. And it's, you know what? It may be a mistake. I'm not saying Mr. Geithner wasn't so busy. He's a busy man that he forgot. But he forgot. What's convenient, if you read this newspaper report, when they caught him on 03 and 04, he took care of it. Now, he should have had a memory jolt when he got caught on 03 and 04 that he really didn't do it on 01 and 02. But he didn't have that memory jolt. He paid that and then got ready to be Secretary of Treasury. Somebody said, oops, wait a minute. What about 02 and 03? Well, 01 and 02. Went back and paid that. So, I don't know. It looks like special privileges to me. And this is about, once again, just like I started off saying, it's about the rule of law that keeps our society together. And if we start waiving it for individuals or groups or whatever, once we start down that path, who makes that decision and what does it do to the rest of us? And do we ever want to get to a situation like was gotten to in Nazi Germany and in communist Russia, where certain people, the laws didn't apply to them at all. Certain organizations, the law didn't apply to. Do we want to go there? And you say, that's crazy. It's like that leak in that dike over there in Holland that we've got the story about. Once that little trickle past the rule of law starts, where does it stop? If you don't plug that hole, what happens next? It's what happens next Americans need to be worried about. I'll yield back to my friend from Georgia.
Well, I just want to say this to my friend from TEP on this, and that I know this is not an easy subject for you to broach every week when you come down here. And, but we have to be serious about this. We are a country of laws. And regardless of whether some people think they can disregard them or not, that's not the way we operate. And we all fall victim to this. But I think it's our responsibility to continually point it out and to point the way that we need to be going in this. And I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you doing this week in and week out. And I feel honored to be able to join you tonight. And with that, I'll yield back my time.
Thank you for joining me.
Texas, in closing, I appreciate you taking the leadership.
And being here, you're always loyal and come up here and help me out, and I do appreciate that, and I appreciate the others that do too. And I think it's time to wrap up our time here today, maybe a little early, by saying that, hey, you're right. There's nothing easy about talking about your colleagues. I'm the first to say that people make mistakes. I've made mistakes, and everybody that, every human being that's ever been around, I think, has made some kind of mistake, with possibly one exception. And I won't go into that. But the facts are that the rule of law is such an important part of keeping America what we are. We brag about the land of the free and the home of the brave. We're only free, and we only have the freedom to do the things we want to do because we establish rules that we're all willing to live by. And so when you go out and you try to work on something, there are rules that pertain, and if you follow those rules, you can go forward. That's the only restriction you have on your freedom to go forward in your life, is you've agreed to certain rules under the law. And you who abide by those rules should be horribly offended when some big shot, some politician gets special treatments. I don't want to be a part of a group that somebody is accused of getting special treatment. I don't think any member of this House really wants to be in that position. It's difficult to talk about these things, but somebody's got to do it. I thank everybody for the time, and I yield back my time this time.
Gentleman yields back his time.